My name is Ryan. This is Sasha. I'm glad that you guys are here, even though we don't have any windows in this room. We'll just forget that there's the sea outside for a little while. Cool, so we're gonna do less mic. Here we go. All right, first thing, I wanna make sure that if you are having any setup issues, then just, come on in, guys. If you're having any setup issues, just raise your hand or something. Basically, on that link, you should see a website. You should be able to pull up the website. And then number two is you should be able to actually edit the files in that site. So hopefully you guys have some sort of a shared directory, or you like to use Vim or something like that, and you actually have it open in the editor. I think the directory for this one's just called Behat. Yeah, okay, good. So that's what we're gonna work in. All right. Good morning, come on in. Nah, 10 minutes late is on time still for day 2. For day 3, 20 minutes late is on time. Okay, so how many of you guys have used a little bit of Behat before? Awesome. This is actually a good thing. Okay, good. How many of you guys are familiar with the term behavior-driven development? Okay, good. This is also good. Okay, a couple people saying sort of. All right. Okay, so with Behat, there's a teeny little small bit of theory. So you have to give me 10 minutes for a small bit of slides, and then we'll actually get in, and the rest of it, I promise, will be nothing but you guys actually coding, and that's it. This is from a larger training presentation, so I'll move past some slides quickly. Don't worry about that. Okay, so how many of you guys know what test-driven development is? Yeah, I figured some more hands. Okay, so hey, I should write the test first and then write the code later, that kind of thing. You guys are super, come on, get in here, let's go. So in test-driven development, it's exactly that. You're supposed to write a test first. So the simple term is write a test that says that if I put 1 into a calculator program and 2 into the calculator program and press add, I get 3. So you write a little test first, it fails, and then you write the calculator app and it passes and everyone's really happy. So that's test-driven development. And behavior-driven development is a version of that. And this guy, Dan North, is sort of the grandfather of this behavior-driven development stuff. And he had a quote that says, behavior is a more useful word than test. Because if you try to explain the idea of test-driven development to a less technical person, it's difficult. You have to say, hold on, I have to write this test first. And they say, I don't know what that means, but either they let you do it or they don't trust you and they don't let you do it. But we can talk about behavior. We can talk about the behavior of a feature. I can talk with you if you're not technical, and we can say the behavior of this feature is you should be able to go to this page and click a link and fill out some fields and press submit. This is good. We can talk about this, and we should talk about this behavior. This is all not important. That's fine, that's fine, I'm gonna go past it. Okay, so before we talk about Behat, and Behat is just a PHP library that leverages some of this theory stuff. So before we talk about Behat, we need to talk about something called the gherkin. Gherkin is a language. So we all have the same problem as developers that we need to follow user stories. So we all do this. We write tickets and says, hey, I need a feature that has an admin page with these buttons, and we all use different language to kind of describe that feature. So Gherkin is a standardized language. There's nothing technical about it. It's just a standard pattern for how we could write user stories. And it comes from the I want to talk louder, but not without blasting all of you guys. It comes from the Ruby community. So Behat is actually a port of a Ruby library called Cucumber. Probably at least some of you guys have heard of Cucumber. And Gherkin comes out of their efforts. So it's actually lots of people sitting down and saying, what would be the best way for us to describe user stories? And that's what Gherkin is. And it's important because we're going to be writing things like this. So don't think about anything technical. Let's all pretend like we are not programmers and we are project managers and we just want to be able to describe what we want. So a project is built of many features, like a product admin feature or a internationalization feature. So what Gherkin says first is we should describe each feature using 4 lines that look like this. So quite literally open a file and say, I need to describe the product admin feature, so I'm going to use these 4 lines. And the first line there is just feature, and then you give it some title. And I'll show you guys examples, and we're going to write some of these, so don't worry about it too much. The title of the feature is not important, but below it are these 3 lines, and these first 2 are really important. So you say in order to, and then after that you list the business value of the feature, actually why it would make you or your company money, basically. The second one, as a B, is the person who will benefit. So if you're talking about a product admin feature, your person that's going to benefit is not your normal front-end user. They don't care or have any idea that you have an admin area. So your person that's benefiting in that case is your admin user. And then the C, I need to, is a kind of short description. It's less important. Something like I need to be able to add, edit, and delete products. Something like that. But these first 2 are important because if you can't define the business value of your feature very easily, if you think, what is the business value of this feature? The feature might suck. It might not actually be a good feature. So it kind of challenges us, especially as developers, to say, why is someone making me actually do this? For example, with the product admin feature, here's an example of what not to do. In order to add, edit, and delete products. Add, editing, and deleting products in itself is not a business value. No one says, I'm going to eat breakfast this morning so I can go to work and add products. No, they actually want products to be shown on the home page. So it's something more like, in order to control the products that our customers see. Something like that. Again, it's all theory, but you're going to see how this actually translates into what we do later. So here are just 2 quick examples to see, and I kind of already did the second one. So feature internationalization, I-18N, internationalization. In order to read news in French, business value, as a French user, because I don't speak French, I need to be able to switch locale. And then news admin panel, that's what we're saying, in order to maintain a list of news, not just be able to add it, but actually maintain what the user is seeing. As a site administrator, I need to be able to edit news. Cool. Also notice that whoever this is I, and we're speaking as their voice, because I say, I need to be able to do this, I need to be able to do that. So we're kind of pretending like this person is actually requesting this to us. Cool, go past this, and there we go. Okay, so once we have the feature, the big picture thing, we'll break that down into many specific user stories. because we might have product admin, right? But that's actually many user stories, listing the products, adding the products, editing, deleting, all that stuff. So we have many scenarios under here, and these are actually much more important. And they always follow the same format. And what's cool is, even if you guys aren't using this exact format now, when you read this, you'll say, yeah, that's a user story. We use different words, but this is exactly what our issues look like. It's the same thing. So it always follows a format of given, when, and then. And you can always have ands in between. So this is basically a given, and then when, and then. I'm going to come back to this, but I want to actually define what those are. So the given line, or lines, because you can have many, describe the initial state. So we want to picture as if I'm taking our site administrator, in this case, the person who's benefiting from the feature, putting them in front of my computer, imagining that the feature is already done, and I'm almost describing what it looks like for them to use the finished feature. Of course, the feature isn't finished. We're imagining how it should work. So given is anything that I need to set up before they sit down. So up here, because eventually in this one, we're going to, this is basically a description of the list page. So if we're going to describe that they should see 5 news articles, then before that person sits down, I need to put 5 news articles into the database, or else they won't see anything. So given is your opportunity to play God and get things set up. When is easy. That's what the user does, and it's as small steps as possible. When I click this link, when I fill in the email field, when I press save, it's those types of things, what they're actually doing. And then is what they see afterwards. So there's always some result. Morning, come on in. There's always some result that they see. So it would be something like, when I press save, then I should see your product has been created, something like that. Awesome. So one last example here. Given I am on the /admin/news page, because we'll start the user there, the actions are when I click new article, and I fill in title with learn BDD today, and I press save. So see how this is basically like 3 whens. You can just chain it. Then I should see a new article has been added. Cool? The 2 important things here are that the when should be stuff that your user can actually do. So don't say, when I add a record to the database. What? What's a database? We want to actually speak at their technical level. And the same thing with then. Then is something they should actually see. So don't say, then an article should be in the database, because they're like, what's a database? So it's actually something they can see, which is, for me personally, is good, because sometimes in the past, I'll have a form that I hit save. I know it's saved, so I don't actually print a message. But if you try to describe it like this, it actually, you say, okay, when I press save, then I should see the same form again empty, because I didn't actually, oh, maybe I should actually print a message out. So it kind of keeps us thinking about the user's experience through this. Because we know it got added to the database, but they don't know. Awesome. That's it. Okay, now we're actually going to do some work. So we're about to see all of that in real live action, but I don't want to bore you guys with any more slides than we have to do. So you will see this in a second, but to give you guys a preview, kind of thinking about what Behat does, is, so we have those scenarios. Wouldn't it be nice if we could write those scenarios and then press a button and something actually, a robot, actually performed those actions and verified that they actually work? So that's what Behat does. We can type something like, when I press save, and we'll be able to execute Behat, and it will actually open a browser and press save. And same thing with then I should see this text. It will look at that browser and see if that text is on the page. So Behat's kind of a machine to read these human-readable sentences. And it's totally magic. No, it's not magic actually at all, as you'll see. Okay, so open up your project. Again, it should be in the Behat directory. And, well, you'll know if you're in the right spot, because if this command doesn't work, then you're in the wrong spot. So anytime we do something from the command line, that's from the virtual machine. So step one is go into your virtual machine, move into the right directory, which is what? var www html workshops. Let's go into there and then run this command. So Behat is a library. How many of you guys regularly use Composer? That's so great. Awesome. It's installed into this project already via Composer. It's not magic. Feel free to open the composer.json file. You'll see a couple entries in there. The Composer install has already been run, so that's the only thing that's happened. One of the things you may or may not know this about Composer, one of the things that when you bring in a library with Composer, some libraries come with a executable file, not all of them, and when they do, Composer will create a symbolic link from that executable, which might be in some deep directory, into a directory that's easier to get to. Usually it's actually vendor/bin. That's a directory full of executables. In this project, I've changed it to just be the bin directory. So even that bin directory was just added there by Composer, and that's just a little executable. All right, so what happened when we ran that? Did you guys see a little bit of nice green lights? Nice. All right, so what actually happened behind the scenes? What does it say that it did? Yes, it created one whole file. So the Behat is very simple, so I want to keep straight like how small the things are that are happening. So this just created one file, and it actually created two directories. So you guys all now have a features/bootstrap/feature context.php file, which you can go ahead and open if you want. We're going to look at that file in a second. If you wanted to go backwards, you would just delete that file. There's nothing else that happened. It's not talking to a database or something. It's just that file. And if you look at that file, it's not there's nothing inside of it anyways. It's just basically an empty class. Oh, also, I didn't mention this. All of these slides are inside of the project. So there's a slides directory inside the project. You can see step one will be a file called 01-something, and almost every step has extra credit. So as we get moving, if you're moving through things quickly, then you get to do the extra credit. There's no prizes. Sorry. Okay, so when well, let me say this first. The point of behavior-driven development is that you're supposed to basically write those features and scenarios before you actually develop and code it. And it really sort of makes sense, because if you're not thinking through what the user stories are beforehand, then that sort of doesn't make sense anyways. So it's a good practice to do this. Now, for us, we're going to do a little bit of true behavior-driven development at the end, but for the most part, we already have a functional site, so we're going to do things in the other order, where we have a functional site, and now we're going to write some features and scenarios to kind of describe and test that. So inside the project, there's a resources directory. I added this, and I put a few things in there just to help us with the project. One of those is called ls.feature. We're going to get warmed up a little bit by using some an existing feature that I wrote. So go ahead and copy. Sorry, guys. Trying to make it as big as possible. There we go. So when we write our features, you create a file with the extension .feature, and then you put it into the features directory. So I know you guys are copying this resources/ls.feature, but imagine that you're writing this. And the goal of this, by the way, is forget about the internet. Rewind to 1990, before the internet. And imagine that Linus Torvalds says, I want you to develop the ls program, the little ls utility on Unix. And so we say, okay, we'll do that, but first we're going to actually write a feature and some scenarios about the ls utility. So that's what this feature file is actually describing the ls program and a scenario on how that should actually work. So there's nothing technical so far. We could be project managers that kind of go through this process of describing this feature and this scenario. Brilliant. Now notice I said earlier that your scenarios should always be at the technical level of the person who's benefiting from the feature. That's really, really important. In this case, who's the person that's benefiting from this feature? Yes, Unix user. So we can actually use the technical level of a Unix user. Unix user actually understands what ls is and running a command is, so we can actually communicate at a little bit more technical level just because our user is actually technical. All right. So step one was we had a new feature, so we wrote the feature line. We added our first scenario. Cool, nothing technical yet. Now, to actually run Behat, just run the bin/Behat again. No arguments this time. I'll kind of explain things after we get it working, so I want you guys to see things before I talk about it too much. So what happens when you run that command? What does Behat do? I see a lot of you guys have it. So you should see a bunch of actual PHP code being dumped out. Yes? So Behat's job is to read. What it does is when you run Behat, that's how you run Behat. It actually looks in the features. It's really simple. It looks in the features directory, finds every .feature file inside of there, and then reads every scenario line by line. And what it wants to do is for every line in the scenario, it wants to execute a PHP function. So when we say something like, given there's a file called foo, it's trying to find a function in our feature context class that it can call. So at some point when I describe Behat as something that can read human-readable language, you have to be thinking, well, how does it do that? That seems magic. It actually does it just by kind of matching the language in the scenario to functions that you have inside of your feature context class. So when it reads a line and it doesn't find a function for it yet, it just dumps out some code here which it wants you to copy into the feature context class. So go ahead and copy all of that code, put that into your feature context class, and then try rerunning Behat. Oh yeah, is there a copy on this? Good question. I know, yeah, because that's a bug in Behat for not adding that for you in the first place. What's the copy in the virtual machine? Does anybody know how to copy? Some of you guys have it. I guess it's different based on your operating system. Are you guys able to copy that? The copy? Nice. So if you rerun Behat, you should get a really terrible error. That's where we want to be right now. So put those into your feature context class, rerun Behat. You should actually get a fatal error. I'll explain that in a second. It's actually something that's missing inside of our code. So again, we're going to get this working first, and I'm going to reverse and explain a few of the things that are going on. But obviously notice that each function has some comments above it. They're called annotations, and they kind of look like the human readable sentence. Behat's actually going to read those, and that's how it's going to do the matching between the language we have in our scenario and which function to call. Good. All right, before we actually get this working, like one little cleanup thing we're going to do. So again, what Behat at a very low level, all it does is it reads each line in the scenario and then just looks for some language here that matches it. And it's kind of cool. It's sort of like regular expressions, except instead of a regular expression, whenever it sees something with a colon, it assumes that's some sort of wild card. So the fact that we have this inside of our feature context class means that in any scenario, we can say something like, given I have a file named foo, or given I have a file named bar, and it's going to execute this function. So that's really all Behat does, is read a line in a scenario, find a function that matches that, and calls it. And that's it. It's just a mapping of that language to these functions. And notice, it's kind of cool that in our scenario, we said something like, given I have a file named, I'm actually going to write it up here. You guys all have something that says, given I have a file named foo, and I have a file named bar. When you write those lines in a scenario, anything you surround by quotes, Behat's sort of smart enough to say, oh, you probably want that to be a wild card. Because notice it didn't generate something here that says, given I have a file named bar, with the word bar there, it was smart enough to say, okay, you kind of want a wild card. So anything in quotes it ends up being kind of a wild card in general. And you can also see, right, that this looks pretty interesting. Obviously, it's matching what we have here with the argument. And you can rename that. In fact, I want you to rename that to something more helpful. So as long, whatever you have colon arg1, it'll be $arg1, colon file will be $file. So whatever we put in that wild card is going to be passed as an argument. And of course, yes, you can have multiple of these inside of one of them, inside of each line. Each line in a scenario is called a step. So you'll hear me say that sometimes. If I talk about a step, I'm talking about a single line in a scenario. Oh, and why, when you run Behat right now, why is it totally dying? Bingo, pending exception. That's actually a little bug in Behat. This pending exception thing that you see here is a special exception in Behat that when you run Behat, it says, oh, they threw a pending exception. It basically means this is still a to-do. We still need to actually fill in this function. The reason it's a fatal error is because we're missing a use statement at the top of our feature context class. That's actually a small bug in Behat. When it generates, when we did the Behat init, it should have generated a file with that use statement up there, but it doesn't in the latest version for some reason. So if you do add that use statement, you don't have to and rerun it. You'd see something that says, oh, I found one scenario, but it's pending. We haven't actually filled in the code yet. What does it tell you? Fatal? It's not just use pending exception. It's like use Behat /something/something. So we wrote our first scenario. You run Behat, it prints out all of these functions, you copy them into your feature context class, and then all you need to do is literally just do in that function whatever you're saying that you do. So when you have something that says, I have a file named, what should we do there? Let's create that file. So what I want you to do is actually fill in those functions. And again, forget about the web and the internet and testing websites. We're going to do that in a second. This is very low level, but just all we literally need to do is just create that file. When we do test for the web, we're going to be doing the same thing. We're going to have steps that say things like when I press save, and then we're going to write code that actually commands a browser. There's some ways to do this in PHP where you can say, hey, go open a browser and press the save button. So it's the same concepts that we're going to be doing once we're actually using stuff in the web. And same thing for the next function, irun. Irun means I run a command. How do you run commands in PHP? Well, there are like 50 ways, but that's one of them. So this is how you create a file. That's really easy. This is one of the ways to execute a command in PHP. That's also really easy. The only interesting thing, and this is really, really important because you'll see this over and over again, is that once we're thinking ahead here. I'm going to scroll down. Somebody let me know if they need that first one. This one here, all it needs to do is run a command. So in theory, all we need is just shell exec. Done. I ran the command. However, the last function says I should see something in the output. It actually needs to look at that output and say, did I see it there? These functions are independent of each other. So there's no way for this function to somehow look at the output of what this function did. They're unrelated functions. So when you have something where you have two functions in your feature context that need to share information, that's no problem. Just create a new private property and just put it there. So that output property is not something special to Behat. This is not a Behat trick where you name a property called output. This is just us being object-oriented developers and just saying, hey, I need to store something on this property so that I can reference it down there. Oops. There we go. You guys let me know if I need to scroll up or down. So run the command here, store the output, and then actually test it there. So every step, so when Behat runs in a second, it's going to read every line in our scenario, call a function, read the next line, call the next function, read the next line, call the next function. Every time it reads a line, that's actually considered a test, like a test that can pass or fail. So how does a test fail? A test fails only if a function throws an exception. It doesn't have to be any particular exception. Any exception that you throw ends up being a failure. So even when we say when I run ls, that's technically a test. And as long as this doesn't throw an exception, which it won't, then it's going to be considered a pass test. So down here, if we find out that we don't see that in the output, then we just need to throw an exception, and that will show onto the screen. When you guys do have this, rerun Behat, and unless I'm lying to you, it will probably pass. Nice. You should even see that I'm ruining your project because you'll have a foo and a bar file that are just sitting in your directory now. Interesting.
Yeah, I tried piping the output directly into the file, and the file was pretty much garbled, so I deleted the file and now...
Oh, the feature context file?
Yeah, that was...
Redo a dash init. Yeah, but the output's gone, or what you had in there was gone, but that'll put it back. There you go. If you have this working, I think I have extra credit on this one. I could be wrong. Yep. If you have this working, change your scenario to make it fail. Like say, then I should see something crazy in the output. So change your scenario temporarily, rerun it, because I want you to see what a failure looks like as well. And if you ever write a test and it passes on the first try, you probably made a mistake. We never do things right on the first try. So always want to make sure that it does in fact fail when it should, and it does in fact pass when it should. Ah, that's interesting. So that's it saying, I don't see any function that matches that language in your feature context. So let's look in the feature context and see what... Ah, so this here, this comments need to be directly above that function. How many of you guys have used or seen annotations before? That's good, that's good, okay. The annotations are just the comments that are above this. So when you hear the word annotation, if you're not familiar with that, it's just talking about those comments that are above each function. And what makes them annotations? We just call comments annotations if we actually have something that reads those comments. So Behat is actually parsing the file and reading out those comments and getting information from those comments. Beautiful. Cool. Passing green, yes. I see lots of green. Okay, so it's kind of like looking here and not seeing anything that matches that text. So let's see, given I have a file named, ooh, get rid of the $sign. Not there, but actually there. Yeah. Very good, very, very good. Perfect. Very nice. How's it going, guys? Good, good, good. Hey, there's a foo in the output. Ah, okay, I think you're very close. Show me your feature context file. And it is right there. It's this, and then you need the greater than sign on output. So similar to what we have here, we have this and then dash arrow. Down here, this dash, but there's no arrow. Yeah, that's a difficult error. Nice. It's always that you do all of the hard stuff, right? And then, leave off some small detail. Nice. Yeah, very good. Very, very good. Very nice. Clean up. Good. Good. Command. Green, awesome. Hey.
Maybe they have to install
Let's see here.
It's not the update.
Did you clone the project?
Yes.
So from GitHub, okay, perfect. Then all we need to do is see that actually is there. Nope. Yeah, need to install Composer, and then once it's installed, .var. So once you install Composer into this directory, then run composer.var install. That will put the vendor directory there, because that's what it does, but also the Composer is what creates the bin directory and puts the Behat executable there. So I'll come back in a second.
Kind of gave me feedback on the exception.
But there is no exception.
Yeah, this one.
But so right now the exception is not being thrown because in fact your test is passing. So, but if you change,
I tried to change that to true and still didn't give
as
it.
false, let's change it in here. Go to the ls and try change I should see foo in the output to I should see something different. Yeah.
It's really imaginative.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, no, this is different. Hold on, this says feature file is not in UTF-8 encoding.
Okay.
That's interesting.
There's
I
no
don't
special characters.
No, I don't see any special characters either. Show me the terminal again. What was that error? Oh, it's a dot underscore ls.
The OS X thing.
Yeah, delete that file because it automatically finds everything called that feature. I've never seen that before. It's back.
No, it isn't.
It might be because the features directory is not in Git yet, so it's not showing anything.
Oh yeah, it's there too.
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah, and then it actually shows you the message could not find, you know, whatever your exception message is. Hey.
Here, when trying to install full, because you know, to install composer I need full. So
Mhm.
I have no, it's not. It's with composer.
There we go. avoid the problem. Now, with any luck, need to install the curl PHP extension. Okay, good. Uh-oh. Somebody forgot to plug their computer in. This guy. We're gonna keep going. If you're having any issues, find Sasha or me, but I think most of you guys have this working. Also, if you do get stuck, we have a little catch up here. There's branches on this project, so you can kind of move and catch up to where we are right now. So if you're really stuck, then do that or find us. Oh, the after scenario? Yeah, you wanna see that? I can totally show that. That's an excellent suggestion. Actually, yeah, let me show. We're going to see a before scenario later as well, but actually, you know what? I don't even have the after scenario because I didn't do that myself. Let me show that real quick though. Not in here. So for the extra credit, because somebody was asking about that, which is kind of cool. How many people have you guys got the extra credit working? Yeah, several of you. So what did you have? Just kind of describe your. What was the secret to getting? Well, first, the extra credit was to run something after the scenario to clean up the files, because we have an extra foo, an extra bar file, and that's fine, but it's not the best. So what was the secret to getting that to work? Somebody that got that working. Yes. So, and you created a new function. So Behat has a few hooks inside of it. So you can create a function. The name here is not important at all. I just invented this function. If you put after scenario, then that function is going to be called after every scenario. And then, of course, you could do code. I won't write the code here, but some code to delete your files that you've created, something like that. What was I going to say? Yeah, we'll actually keep that. We're going to see a before scenario later. One of the important things about scenarios is that they should be independent of each other. So you don't want to do something where in your first scenario you create a file called foo, and in your second scenario you rely on that file being there. You want to be totally independent. In the second scenario, if you need a file named foo, you will say, given I have a file named foo. Don't assume it's there. Because you can imagine if you have 10 scenarios and the eighth one is failing, well, it's actually nice to be able to run the 8th one only. There's a way in Behat to say only run this one scenario. If they're all coupled together, then you have to run all of them. Maybe it takes 30 seconds and it's no fun. So keep them independent. Okay, so that was Behat, which we're going to continue to work with, but that's what Behat does. It reads these feature files. Every line in the scenario gets executed as a function. That's it. It's just that mapping. By the way, the first 4 lines in our feature file that describe the feature, feature, in order to, as, those lines, Behat actually doesn't read those. That's part of behavior-driven development. It's part of the process of thinking about how to develop a feature, but technically, it doesn't even matter if that's there. Behat does not actually parse those. Same thing with the first line of the scenario. It's always scenario : and then just some name of the scenario. That's just for us to help organize and give our scenarios names. Behat only reads the givens, the whens, and the thens. All right, so that's Behat. The second library we need to talk about is one of my absolute favorite libraries in PHP. It's called Mink, and it has nothing to do with Behat. Mink is a PHP library that lets you command a browser. So it lets you in PHP say things like, go to this page, click this link, fill out this form, and then look at the h1 tag and tell me what text is in the h1 tag. And by command a browser, it actually, if you want it to, it can literally open up Firefox or Chrome. Or you can run it in a headless way where it's not really using a browser, it's just making curl requests in the background. So you can still do the same things, but it's not actually opening a browser. What's cool is the same code, you can write the same code that says, go to this page, click this link, do this. And then it's just one little piece of configuration that says, use curl commands, don't actually open a browser, or actually open a browser using Selenium, or you can also use Phantom.js and other things like that. Well, you'll see that in a second. You guys, if you did a poll on the repository when you came in, you should have a mink_play file. Make sure I got the name right, yes. So if you open this file, and if you don't have this file, you need to do a git pull origin, which may or may not work because if you've edited files. Hopefully you've done that. I'll show this file in a second. We're not actually going to do anything with it. I just added it this morning as an example of what Mink does. So actually, let me open that right here. So again, Mink is just its own PHP library. This is just an example of me playing with Mink inside of a file. If you guys have this file, you can actually execute it. So just, we don't know any Mink code yet, but you can kind of see what this is doing. So we have this session. Well, first thing we do is we create a session. Session in Mink, so Mink is a really small library, so we're basically going to learn what it does in 5 minutes. The session object basically represents a browser tab. Anything you can do with the browser tab, you can do with the session. And really, you can't can't do much with a browser tab. You can go to a URL, you can go back, you can go forward, you can refresh. That's about it, okay? So we create the session, and that's what we do. We call session visit, and this actually takes us to that site. And then we can do a few things like get the status code or get the URL, but that's about it. Cool? So this is sort of the first important object inside of Mink. I know it says important object number 2, but don't worry about that one's even actually not really important. Once you're on the page, the second important object is this page. So you take the session, you call session get page. That page variable is basically like the jQuery object in JavaScript. It knows everything about the DOM, about the HTML DOM, and you can use it to find elements. So I could say find this H1 and give me its text. So anything you can do in jQuery, you can do it with this page thing here. So here's an easy example, page get text. It actually basically does gets the HTML and strips out all the HTML tags. It's just getting the content of the page. Oh yeah, I forgot to change that because your presenter forgot to change that. Good catch. The real important thing you want to do with the page object is actually drill down and find elements with CSS. So this is how you do it. So page find. This is always the word CSS. Trust me on that for now. This just says I want to find with CSS. There are other ways to find things, but they're less common. So I want to find something with CSS. Here's the CSS I want to use. And this returns, so we have the session object, important object number 1. The page object is important object number 2. And then once you use the page object to find something, you end up with the third important object, which is a node, just something that represents an H1 tag or an anchor, something specific on the page. And once you have the node, you can do things like node get text, node get attribute, things like that. And most importantly, something like you can also click a node. Okay, and that's what we're going to use. If you can imagine writing a web crawler with this, that's what you're typically going to do. You're going to say, go to this page, find this element, click it. Go to this page, find this form element, set its value. There's things like that. So there's, in addition to click, there's a set value function. Okay? So if you guys, you don't have to, if you guys actually have this file, you can actually just run it from the command line. So PHP minkplay.php. And it's not very impressive. There's not a lot of pretty colors, but if my internet works, yeah, there we go. It's actually going out to that site, finding the links, printing things, and clicking. So remember what it did is it actually went to this page, printed out the text, found the first menu link with CSS, which is the word home. It then found a link with the text of extras, clicked that link, and then printed out the URL. So obviously, this is using the curl method behind the scenes. You did not see any browsers pop up when it was doing this, but you could configure it to actually open up a real browser. I want you guys to Google for the Mink API docs. I normally really don't like API docs very much, but this library is so small that most of the time all you need to know is I have a node that represents an H1. What are the functions I can call on this? Like get text, get HTML, get attribute. What are those functions that I can actually call? Where did it go? And I do this all the time, and now suddenly it's hiding from me. Am I calling it the wrong thing? Mink API docs, right? Is it the first link? Oh no. The reason I can't find it is because they changed it. Never mind. Dang it. Yeah, it's here. Sahi driver, zombie driver, la 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 la. It's all the way at the bottom. Thanks, guys. Oh. Yeah, because they actually changed. So Behat, let's see, this is broken. Come on, guys. Living on the wild side of the web. I think it's actually okay because this page actually takes the place of the API docs and is actually a little bit better, it looks like. So remember when I said, find the API docs? I actually meant find this page. I was just seeing if you guys were doing it. You are. So let's see here. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. Here we go. So this is kind of the part I was talking about. So the pattern's always going to be the same. Go to a URL, use that find method to find an element via CSS, and then on that element you're going to perform some action. And this section kind of starts to talk about some of the things that you can do with that. What's cool about this is that anything you can do, basically anything you can do on the web, there's a function for it with Mink. So of course you can get an element and click on it. But you can also call something called attach file. Right click, double click, hover over, which is actually where you find two elements and you say, element 1, arrow hover over, and then, or sorry, that's drag to. Element 1, arrow drag to, and then you give it element 2. It actually emulates the dragging of that element from one spot to another. Obviously, if you're using curl, not all of these work. So if you are using something that relies on JavaScript, that's when you do need to set up Mink to say, no, we can't use curl in this case. We actually need to open up a real browser because we're actually relying on some JavaScript. In fact, that was the reason that Mink was made, was before maybe you were writing a script to be a crawler or something you could test with. So you were just writing some PHP code that would run curl commands. And you made this really beautiful test suite, and you were trying to high-five your teammates, and everyone was really proud of you. And then somebody said, well, what about all these pages that require JavaScript? And then you had to quit and leave the company because you were like, oh crap, we have to rewrite everything. None of this works at all. So Mink was created so that you could write your code in one way, and then just with that one little configuration parameter say, I want to use curl or I want to use JavaScript. And I'll show you guys how to turn that on and off later. I'm going to kind of avoid us doing the JavaScript one because you're on a virtual machine. So the opening of a browser is not really possible. In fact, it actually is possible. So there are ways, even on a virtual machine, to configure things so that you can actually run things in JavaScript. So we're not going to do it because you still don't visually see it, so it's not like really cool and impressive. Normally when I give this demo, if you're doing things locally, I say, now change this setting, enter, and it pops up, and everyone's eyes go, ooh. But we're in a virtual machine, so we can't do that. All right. That's fine. Okay, back to this. So that's Mink. Find an element with CSS, click it. It's a crawler, okay? And it's very, very powerful. Hold on, there was one more thing I wanted to mention about that. Sorry, I added this file just this morning because I wanted to show it to you guys. There are, in fact, two ways to find things on the page. Not just one, but two. This one makes sense, right? Everyone says, yes, I've used CSS before. This is easy. But there's also this one here. So you can find something via CSS, or you can find something via the text that you actually see. So when you use CSS, it's this way. If you want to find something via text, there's find link. There's also find button, so it finds a button with the text. There's also find field. You'll find a text element or a text area, any form element with that text. What do I mean by that text? So in this case with a link, it's looking for an anchor tag that has that text. or an anchor tag with a title attribute that is set to that text, or an anchor tag with an image inside of it whose alt attribute is set to that text. And there's actually even a couple of other things it does. So anything that you can possibly dream of to consider this as text, it's going to go and find it via that. And it's also fuzzy, so you don't have to worry about, oh, my anchor has like a line break and then the text and then a line break. It's fuzzy, so it'll find it even if it doesn't match exactly. So it's really, really handy. When we get into Behat, it's going to be handy because it's going to allow us to say things like, when I click extras, instead of saying something like, when I click .navbar -nav space a colon nth element 6, or something insane like that. It's going to allow us to actually reference the text. For find field, that one's incredible. If you say find field username, it's actually going to look for a label element whose text is username, and then use the for attribute to find which field that actually points to. So same thing, you can say things like find field username instead of some terrible CSS that's not understandable for less technical people, and honestly it's not understandable for us 1 week from now when we say, what the hell was the 6th anchor element, child, nth child? I don't even remember what I was trying to click there. That's actually one of the killer features of Mink when you see it in Behat. Okay, so all of that was to show you that we have Behat, we have Mink, and you can start to imagine that if we put these together, all kinds of fireworks would happen. If we could get access to that Mink session object from within our feature context class, then we could start having scenarios like when I go to /admin, because then we would just use the session object and say visit /admin. Cool? So we could, if we wanted to, just in our feature context class, instantiate that session object. We could do that manually. We're PHP developers. There's nothing stopping us from doing that. But because Behat and Mink are so commonly used together, there's a plugin that integrates them. In the Behat world, if you see the word extension, that's their word for plugin. So there's a Mink extension library, and it basically plugs these together. It's already installed via Composer, so there's no magic going on. If you look at your composer.json file, you'll see Mink extension in there. All we need to do is just configure it. So first, before we do that, remember how I said that each line in a scenario is called a step? So given, when, then, each of those is a step. Each function inside of your feature context class is called a definition. It's not really important, but when you read about Behat, you're going to see the term step, the line, and definition, which is the function. So right now, because we have 3 functions inside of our feature context class, we sort of have 3 definitions. We have 3 bits of language that we could use in the future without having to write any more code. So if you want to see all of the built-in language that you have at this moment, you can run this command. So go ahead and do that. That's a -dl for definition list, which is why I said that's called definition. So run bin/behat -dl. How many things are in that list right now? 2, 3? 3. Yeah, I should see 3. If you see more than 3, then you are overachieving. You have done too much work. Cool. So no magic there. So to hook Mink extension, to hook the plugin, to configure the plugin, we need a configuration file. Notice, remember, all we have so far with Behat is a feature file, ls.feature, and then a feature context class. There's no configuration anywhere. It's just you can write features, you have the file. That's all you need, those 2 things. Once you, at some point, you'll need to start configuring Behat a little bit more. Like for example, right now, Behat by default looks in the features directory for your feature files. If you needed it to be some other directory for some reason, that's when you would need to start configuring Behat. And to do that, you can just put a behat.yml file at the root of your project, and when you run Behat, it automatically reads that configuration file and you can change stuff. So I've prepared a file for us. So in the resources directory, again, I added the resources directory just to save us all some typing. We have a behat.yml file. Copy that to the root of your project, because again, that's where Behat looks. automatically. And you'll see in that file, there's nothing much there. It's just, in order for Behat to know that the Mink extension is there, you have this little configuration that says, hey, there's a Mink extension library, I want you to use it. There's also a base URL setting. We'll see that in a second. That base URL setting is going to be used so that we, in our scenarios, can just say things like, when I go to /admin, and then automatically Mink will go to that website /admin. So we don't have to hard code the host name in our scenarios. That's all that is. All right, second thing. Inside of your feature context class, right now, what class does feature context extend? Or it doesn't actually extend anything. It implements something. Yeah, implements, yeah, exactly. So which is not really a very important detail. I want you guys to make this extend Mink context now, which means you're going to need to say extends Mink context. How many of you guys are somewhat familiar with PHP namespaces? Good, good, good. Most of you, okay. So you'll want to say extends Mink context. But the Mink context is something that lives deep inside of Mink, or actually inside of Mink extension, so we'll need a use statement for it. And then implements, et cetera, et cetera. Somebody use autocomplete. What's the use statement on that Mink context?
Behat Mink extension context.
Thank you. And by the way, how did we magically know that? Well, normally you would be reading the documentation on how to set this up. It would tell you what that is. Or if you knew the class name and you have an editor that does autocomplete, which I'm guessing is probably what you did. What's that? Oh, okay. You should have said, no, I just guessed it.
Actually, I guess several times, but
Okay, once you do that, so we've only made 2 changes here, that new configuration file and this new base class. Go ahead and list your definitions again. Do your dash definition list. Should have maybe just a couple extra things in there. You're almost there. Because the first step earlier was that one time you need to run --init, which creates this file. Yep. Now you should be in better shape. You don't have any definitions because you didn't have the first part, but that's actually okay. We've moved beyond that, so you should be able to start right here. So now now that you have a feature context class, you can go and make that change to make it extend main context, and you'll be in good shape. Cool. So do you guys have lots of garbage being dumped to your screen now? If you look closely, you basically have now everything you would need to basically do every normal function on the web. The fact that these show up on the list means that right now we could go to a scenario and say something like, when I go to quote /admin quote, because one of these is some text that matches that. And we wouldn't have to write any PHP code because there's built-in functionality that gives us this. Okay? Where is that built-in functionality coming from? What black magic just happened right now? If you want to, if you're someone that likes clicking into core code, that Mink context class, if you open that, it's just a class that looks exactly like our feature context class. It has functions. Those functions have annotations above them. So the reason these magically show up is just because when Behat runs, it reads all the annotations from our feature context, and it reads the annotations from Mink context. So it's just actually doing the same thing that we're doing. And what is it doing inside of those functions? Like the function that has when I go to /admin, that function actually just uses the Mink session object we saw and goes to that specific, has Mink go to that specific URL. We're going to use Mink directly, but the point here is we just inherited lots and lots of dangerous definitions that we can just start using. And actually, are we? What time am I forced to let everybody take a break? In 10 minutes? Perfect. All right. So put all of the LS feature stuff in the past. I wanted to do that so you could see how Behat worked all by itself. But that's done now, and so now we're going to move on. You guys have this silly website that you brought up, the behat.easysc. If you play with it, it's just a site that has like a little product form. You enter boxes, it lists it. It's very, very simple. It also has a login, which we'll use in a second. So this is the site that we're going to test. And again, for true behavior-driven development, we'd write the features and the scenarios first before actually writing this. But obviously, we can't do that in our short time. So we're starting with the site, and we're going to describe what the site does and hopefully get our test to actually pass. So the first big feature that we are going to test, or that we would develop if we were actually making the site, is the product admin area. The fact that you can click products, list products, add new products. So I want you guys to create a new product admin feature file. And this time, I'm not going to give you guys all the answers. So I want to remind you that this is the format that you should have on top. But I want you guys to try filling in each of those. In other words, don't type the word business value. You don't get any coffee if you type the word business value. Oh, yeah. Thanks. It's not very profound. Said it's not very important. So from a technical perspective, this step is not doing anything. We're just describing the feature. If you reran Behat when you're done with this, it'll still run your LS scenario, but it won't do anything with this file because Behat only parses the scenarios. It doesn't really care about these 4 lines. It's supposed to describe, well, again, nothing, Behat doesn't read it, nothing technical reads it. It's just for our own benefit. Oh, yeah, okay. So again, we have to pretend like we have not built the site yet, and somebody came to us and said, oh my God, we need a product admin area because I need to be able to enter products so that they show up on the front of the site. So some manager or somebody has come to you and has this need, and they're pouring their heart out to you and says, you're the only person that can help me. You have to build me this feature for these reasons. So we're sort of imagining that this conversation is happening, and that's what we're describing here. So the feature, for name a feature, it would be something like product admin area. And then you go on there and just kind of imagine what some business value might be. All right, does anybody have any really good business value they want? What do you guys have here? Somebody shout out one. Yes, I'm going to start there. Yeah, add new products. Yeah, so it's difficult. Those aren't bad ones, but it's sort of like, you know, can we get even more at why we're doing this? Now, really, we don't know because it's an imaginary site, so you have to use your imagination. Yeah. To maintain products. You can even spell. Yeah. To control the products being sold on the site. Again, it depends entirely on why we're doing this. Actually, in this case, the correct answer was probably this, right? The business value was that I was telling you guys that you don't get coffee unless you write this down. So who's the user that's benefiting? Yeah, exactly. As an admin, or depending on your company, as a product editor. Maybe you have some big giant company and you have people you call product editors or something like that. And then the last one is the least important. This is where I usually describe it a little bit more. I need to add and view products. Yeah, and change, yeah. Except I didn't actually, you can't actually change it with my feature. But yeah, in a perfect world, yeah, I need to add, edit. We'll even say delete and view. Cool? All right. So next what we're going to do after coffee is we're actually going to start adding some scenarios to this. So this was just for us. Again, it is good to go through the business value of it. For me personally, having the business value in front of you clarifies what you're doing and when you should stop. So for example, if my goal is to simply let someone put some products on the front end as easily as possible, if that's the business value, then maybe I shouldn't be adding all of these crazy like taxonomy functionality and stuff. Just get that basic functionality done first, because that's the real business value. So sometimes the business value helps you focus on keeping your scope in check a little bit and not adding lots of bells and whistles. Because again, if you can't justify something from business value, then don't do it. If you do need taxonomy for your products, that would probably be a different feature that talks about product taxonomy and describes the business value, being able to show a suggested products next to a product. That would actually be a real business value, and then you would be able to develop that feature. All right, let's see. Ooh. Yeah. Oh, SQLite. I believe it's in a LS data. Oh, yeah, LS. It's in a data directory. If you guys have this working, then you can grab some coffee.
The problem that can appear here is that if you run tests, the database is created with, if you run web, the database is created with Apache or whatever web server you're using, and then in Behat, command line user does not have the.
Oh, we're getting permissions issues? Ah, okay.
So you need to remove.
Or chmod 777, that directory? Yeah. If you're having like database issues or something, you may need to chmod the data directory. We have a little SQLite database.